Right. Let us come to questions to the Secretary of State for Education. Caroline Ansell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Early feedback from my local school leaders suggests that tutoring is going to make a real difference, but there is some small concern that it can come with an opportunity cost in the school day, potentially impacting pupils' experience of that broad and balanced curriculum, especially creative arts and sports. Is this then an important consideration in the longer school day debate, especially if tutoring could prove to be the longer-term strategy we need to address the pre-pandemic attainment gap?
Would you just pick up the first part and the grouping? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with your permission, I'll answer questions 1 to 5 together. My honourable friend raises an important issue, and I think that as we invest, and the largest investment in tutoring that this country has ever seen, what we do want to do is look at how we can continue to make changes and improvements to the whole of the school day. So not only can it embed the tutoring revolution that we're driving forward, but also ensure that the other areas of enrichment that are so important for a child's development are also properly incorporated in any of those changes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My area of Kirklees continues to have higher COVID case rates than the national average. So that means more pupils and students having to self-isolate and miss classroom teaching, with its increased impact on well-being and mental health. So can the Secretary of State please tell me what extra catch-up funding and support is being made available for schools and colleges in areas like mine, where there are above average rates of absence?
Well, as my honourable friend will be aware, there's a £650 million universal catch-up premium, as well as, of course, the recovery premium on top of that. And this is very much to ensure that schools such as his within his own constituency are best able to target that money at the areas that are going to have the most impact on children. And we mustn't lose sight of the fact that children from whatever backgrounds have been impacted as a result of COVID, and this is why we've always aimed to have the flexibility within the system for schools to be able to support all children.
Let's go to Henry Smith. Henry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome the Secretary of State's comments. Can he say what particular support will be made available to disadvantaged pupils who have a disability and therefore are more affected still?
My honourable friend raises a vitally important point, and of course this is why we took the decision to ensure a higher rate of funding for special schools and also schools who provide alternative provision, recognising the fact that they will want more specialist and one-to-one tutoring for those children.
Let's wander up to Mark Logan. Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And would the Secretary of State agree to meet with me to discuss Tutor the Nation, as it's now being rolled out right across Bolton, and the lessons that it might provide for the rest of the country?
Well, I'd very much like to hear how not only is Tutor the Nation tutoring Bolton, but how it can do so much more to tutor all the other parts of the nation as well. So I'd be more than delighted to meet with my honourable friend, and I'll ask my office to get in touch in order for us to be able to meet together to discuss the work that Tutor the Nation is doing in his own constituency.
James Sunderland.
Mr. Speaker, could the Secretary of State please update the House on progress with the SEND review, and also confirm that we will be investing more in focused intervention for those who need extra support?
Well, I know this is an issue, Mr. Speaker, that's very close to my honourable friend's heart, and yes, we have been making progress in terms of special educational needs review. It has, sadly, as a result of the pandemic, the speed at which we had hoped to have been coming back to the House has been slowed, but we will be updating the House in the near future on this. It's incredibly important that the interventions that we have for children with the most acute needs are specially tailored to address some of the challenges that COVID have thrown up, but also the continued challenges that all children experience who do suffer from special educational needs.
Shadow Secretary of State Kate Green.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr Speaker. Will the Secretary of State tell the House what proportion of children will have received tutoring under the National Tutoring Programme by the end of this academic year?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as we set out, our aim was for 250,000 children to be going through the National Tutoring Programme scheme. But as a result of the take-up of the National Tutoring Programme and the success that individual tutoring has had and small group tutoring, we set out our ambition and our aim to massively expand that over the coming years.
Kate Green.
So the latest figures show that it's just under 3% of pupils in this academic year, and even the funding for next year will reach only 8% of students. Yet last week in Prime Minister's questions, the Prime Minister said the government wants to get on the side of all kids who don't have access to tuition and support them. So why did the Secretary of State and the Prime Minister fail to persuade the Chancellor of the Exchequer to invest in what Sir Kevin Collins said is needed to secure children's futures? Or does he in fact agree with the Chancellor who said, and I quote, that the government have maxed out on support?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister and myself have outlined a clear plan in order to be able to roll out tutoring to 6 million children right up and down the country. We recognise what an important role that small group tutoring has and how this can benefit every child. That is why we have set out ambition. That's what we're going to deliver on. It's already been an incredibly successful programme. We want to build on it. We want to add extra flexibility in for schools so it can reach all children right across the nation.
Let's go to the chair of the Select Committee, Robert Halfon. Robert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Even before the pandemic, persistent absence, pupils missing 10% or more of their education, was alarmingly high at 13.1%. As pupils have returned, the overall rate has remained stubbornly high at 13%, and that's around 916,000 pupils. And for secondary pupils, it's actually risen to 15%, from 15% to 16.3%. So what are the plans from the Department for Education to bring persistent absence down?
Well, this is an incredibly important area, and this is why we, at the very start of the pandemic, set up REACT teams, which was a cooperation between schools, between local government, between the DFE itself, as well as the police, in order to be able to target some of those youngsters who are struggle the most and are most likely not to be in school. We're continuing to expand the work through MHCLG in terms of helping those families that struggle the most and recognising that it's children in this category who are most vulnerable and possibly the most likely to have persistent absence in schools. And this is why we'll continue to work across government, recognising it's not just schools, but it's the local authorities, it's the police, it's health and social care, about coming together to ensure that we bring children back into the classroom and make sure they're not missing out on school.
Mr. Speaker, it's important that pupils are well prepared to manage their money, make sound financial decisions, and know where to seek further information. Financial education forms part of the citizenship curriculum, which can be taught at all key stages, but is compulsory at key stages 3 and 4.
Grateful to the Minister for his answer. In 2013, the Money and Pension Service found that our money habits and attitudes towards finance are formed by the age of 7. Not yet 8 years later, the government has still not made financial education compulsory within the primary school curriculum. Does the Minister agree that teaching our children positive savings habits at a young age is vital to their financial futures, and that dormant assets from the savings and investment sector could fund initiatives like Kickstart Money to deliver primary financial education for all?
Well, the priority at primary school must be to ensure that children have a firm grasp of the fundamentals of arithmetic, that they can add, subtract, multiply and divide, that they know their times tables by heart, that they can add, subtract and multiply fractions. And in 2013, the government introduced a new primary maths curriculum that also includes ratio and proportions, teaching pupils to use percentages and introducing them to algebra. And in year 2, pupils are introduced to the values of our coinage. All this is fundamental to being secure in handling finances and being taught financial education at Key Stage 3.
Substantive question to Minister Donald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government values the arts and social sciences. High quality provision in a range of subjects, including archaeology, is absolutely vital for our workforce and our public services, and is culturally enriching for the society. Universities receive a top-up from the taxpayer for all the subjects referred to, and whilst the OFS consultation has proposed changes to the amounts, it does not seek to remove the top-up entirely.
Let's go to Margaret Greenwood. Margaret.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government's decision to cut funding to performing and creative arts, media studies and archaeology courses by a total of £20 million will diminish our future cultural offer, reduce opportunities for students and put jobs at risk. At the University of Chester, the University College Union is campaigning hard to save jobs, and I pay tribute to them. Nevertheless, the university is still planning on making redundancies in some areas, including music, media and performance. So does the Minister recognise the huge contribution that the arts and culture make to the UK economy and to all of our lives? And will she support the UCU campaign to save jobs at the University of Chester?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite claims by the Honourable Member, the Strategic Priorities Grant accounts for approximately only 0.05% of higher education providers' total income. And the House should be under no illusion that this government 100% supports the arts, which is why we asked the OFS to invest an additional £10 million in our world-leading specialist providers, many of which specialise in arts provision, and why we have spent £2 billion through the Culture Recovery Programme, plus furlough, plus VAT and other reliefs, more than any other country.
Shadow Minister Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Research by the British Academy has shown that of the 10 fastest growing sectors in the UK economy, 8 employ more graduates from the arts, humanities and social sciences than the other disciplines. While Million Plus states that there is an economic imperative to invest in creative arts education, with job creation double the rate of the rest of the economy. Just take media studies, which the government states is not a strategic priority, despite us making some of the best films, TV, theatre and advertising in the world. Last year, the UK saw inward investment and co-production spend in film and TV account for 83% of entire production spend, underlining our global reputation. Mr. Speaker, the government seems to be unaware that this country is a globally renowned creative powerhouse. Can I just urge the government to get into shape, and will the Minister accept that the benefits that this nation derives from university education cannot be measured solely in terms of its immediate economic impact?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just to reiterate, again, this government is not disputing the value of the arts, either to our economy or our society. I want to fully confirm this on the record. We have asked the OFS to consult on altering the high-cost subject funding to enable a reprioritisation for some subjects towards the provision of high-cost subjects that support the NHS, wider healthcare policy, high-cost STEM subjects and subjects meeting specific labour market needs. But to reiterate once again, this only accounts for approximately 0.05% of higher education providers' total income.
We have a substantive question to the Secretary of State.
I'm committed to levelling up education, seeing strong multi-academy trusts as the best vehicle for achieving this. That's why we're investing £10 million in 4 high-needs areas, including Ashfield and Mansfield, to improve pupil outcomes, up to half of which will be channelled through the successful Trust Capacity Fund.
Let's go to Ben Bradley. Ben.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome the news that Mansfield and Ashfield will get a share of that £10 million fund to drive school improvement in disadvantaged areas and, of course, to boost academic outcomes for our young people? That's very welcome indeed. The other half of that conversation is perhaps about the non-academic side, the cultural enrichment, extracurricular activities, raising aspiration that might support young people to reach their potential. So can my right honourable friend tell me what opportunities might exist in that kind of space for our schools to access support?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right to point to the enrichment that goes on in so many of the most successful schools right across the country. And this is why we're absolutely committed to trying to work with trusts from across the country to be targeting areas such as Mansfield and Ashfield to bring in the most successful trusts into those areas to drive up educational attainment. And we look forward to working with him, and I'll be delighted to sit down with my honourable friend to discuss what more we can do in terms of not just driving academic attainment across schools in his constituency, but also the rich cultural offer that schools can offer their pupils, which is incredibly important for all children.
SNP spokesperson Carol Monaghan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And it might be raining today in London, but in Glasgow and across Scotland today the sun's out, which is great because over the next week Scottish schools break up for their summer holidays. So I'm sure the whole House will join me in thanking teachers and support staff for the great work they've done, and will wish Scottish school children and young people a very safe and enjoyable summer holiday. Mr Speaker, improving academic outcomes for disadvantaged children needs strong professional input, but hunger is not conducive to effective learning. So when will we see this government mirror the approach of the Scottish Government and provide free school meals for all primary school children?
Well, I'd very much like to join the Honourable Lady in sort of thanking teachers, not just across Scotland, but right across the United Kingdom, who've done an amazing job. And it's lovely to see her in the Palace of Westminster after a period of time. And so we are absolutely committed to ensuring that we support families and we support children. This is why we're rolling out their holiday activity and food programme, which is, we believe, an incredibly important part of actually supporting children, not just by feeding them, but also providing activities as well.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Unfortunately, Secretary of State avoids the question, but for many families on the edge, free school meals really does make a difference. And it's a tale of two governments here. We've got the Scottish Government focused on health and well-being of children, including the transformational Scottish Child Payment of £10 a week per eligible child, and the UK Government that isn't taking action with free school meals and primary children. So perhaps the Secretary of State could update the House on any discussions he's had with the Chancellor to provide more money in this area, and possibly even on retaining the £20 a week universal credit uplift.
Well, one of the great advantages that we have of being a United Kingdom, Mr Speaker, is actually we're able to pull together and make sure that there is the support that has been made available, whether it is through the furlough scheme that everyone within the United Kingdom has been able to benefit from, whether it's from the uplifts in universal credit, which, of course, right across the United Kingdom, everyone has been able to benefit from, or whether it's through our continued action that we have undertaken in terms of putting extra funding, either in terms of free school meals, whether it's the holiday activity and food programme, which, of course, the different devolved administrations, including the Scottish Government, have been able to benefit through as a result of the Barnett consequentials that have fed through as a result of that.
Question number 15, sir.
Mr Speaker, maintained nursery schools are an important part of the early years sector and provide valuable services, especially in disadvantaged areas, and the Government remains committed to their long-term funding and to reaching a long-term solution by working with the sector. Any reform to their funding will follow a public consultation.
I'm grateful to the Minister for her reply, but we need this long-term settlement for maintained nursery schools. There are 3 wonderful maintained nursery schools in my constituency, and their very survival is now in jeopardy. We need that long-term settlement, and even more urgently, we need a consultation on reallocating supplementary funding so areas like Barnet that have got 0 from that funding can actually receive some of it as an interim solution to keep them above water until we get that settlement.
My right honourable friend is a true passionate spokesperson for the maintained nursery school sector. Supplementary funding allows the local authorities to protect their maintained nursery schools at the 2016-17 funding level. Back in 2017, Barnet got a 23% increase in its early years funding rate. That's now the 11th highest rate in England. And so supplementary funding was not provided because there wasn't a funding gap in the M&S sector to protect. But the next spending review will consider future government funding, including that for maintained nursery schools.
We have a substantive question to the Secretary of State.
We announced the first 50 rebuilding projects in February as part of a commitment to 500 projects over the next decade. A process to identify the next 50 projects, informed by the Department's data on the condition of schools, began in March, and we plan to confirm which schools are included later on this year.
Let's go to Christian Matheson. Christian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State will know that Upton High School in my constituency is rated good with an outstanding sixth form, but it needs a rebuild, and the local authority maintenance and repair budget is both inappropriate and insufficient. So what advice can the Secretary of State give to me, to the governors and the head teacher of Upton High to ensure that we're on that next list?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as tempted as I am to pre-announce that list to the honourable gentleman, I'm afraid I'm not quite in that position, but I'd be very happy to meet with the honourable gentleman to sort of discuss some of the challenges that he has. The reason that we have announced a commitment to the rebuilding of 500 schools, admittedly, over a number of years, is so that we're able to have a proper sight of some of the challenges that high schools and primary schools face, have the proper information in terms of their condition, and have a proper understanding as to where that priority sits as part of a broader national priority. But I'd be very happy to sit down with the honourable gentleman to discuss in further detail.
Question number 17, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Over 1.3 million laptops and tablets and 75,000 4G wireless routers have been distributed to schools and local authorities. We are building on the Department's significant investment in devices, platforms, training and digital services to develop an evidence-based strategy for the most effective long-term approach to digital technology in education.
Mr. Speaker, before the lockdown, children on the wrong side of the digital divide were already leaving school behind their classmates. Schools closed, and despite the government's tech rollout and that of the great community effort right across the country, a quarter of children on free school meals did less than 1 hour's schoolwork a week. This is not a problem for the past. Closing the digital divide will be critical to genuinely levelling up our tech-reliant society. So will the government support my campaign calling for every child entitled to a free school meal to have internet access and an adequate device at home?
Well, I read the honourable members and my right honourable friend, the member for Harlow's joint article in the Times this morning about the UNICEF report and her objectives. And I agree with much of what they both have written, particularly about the importance of closing that digital divide. And I'm grateful for the acknowledgement in that article of the much needed support to disadvantaged children that the provision by this government of 1.3 million laptops and tablets gave. But one shouldn't underestimate the size and scale of that procurement. 1.3 million devices built to order, shipped, configured and delivered to schools and local authorities, all at a time of peak international demand for such computer equipment.
Substantive question to Minister Gill.
We published guidance in 2020 on the delayed admission of summer-born children to a reception class, where that is what parents want. In May, the Secretary of State issued a statement to ensure admissions authorities take these decisions in the best interest of the child, and we will legislate when parliamentary time permits.
Let's go across to Stephen Hammond. Stephen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank my right honourable friend and the Department for their continuing support for my campaign to recognise the need for summer-born children to have that flexibility. He rightly says that the Department will legislate as and when is appropriate. But can I urge him to speak again to the Treasury to point out this would be one of the most effective ways of levelling up and creating levelling up opportunities? And will he meet with me to discuss what the Treasury's response may be and what more can be done to ensure that legislation is brought forward?
Yes, of course. I'd be delighted to meet my honourable friend. Summer-born children who do defer entry to schools by year continue, of course, to be entitled to a childcare place before they start school. So the costs will depend on the number of parents who choose to delay entry and the need for childcare. But I should say to my honourable friend that on the surveys that we've been carrying out with local authorities, the vast majority of requests to delay entry and to return to school in reception rather than year one are granted by local authorities.
We have a substantive question to Secretary of State.
In the last 3 years, there's been an 18% increase in local authority spend on school transport, reaching £1.3 billion in the year 2019-2020.
Let's go to Mary California. Mary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While St Leonard's School in Durham has done their best to subsidise the cost of school transport for families over the last year, they can no longer afford to do so. And for some, the cost per student will rise from £50 to £70 a month. Can the Education Secretary explain what the government is doing to protect families in Durham from this increased and unexpected cost? And will you meet with me before the summer holidays to discuss school transport?
Well, if the Honourable Lady would be kind enough to sort of send in the more the details as to the issues she's raised, I'll be happy to organise for the Minister of State for Schools to meet with her to discuss it in finer details and some of her concerns and some of the challenges that maybe the local authority are facing and what needs to be done by Durham County Council.
Substantive question to Minister Ford.
Schools are under a legal duty to safeguard and promote the welfare of all children and must have regard to keeping children safe in education. The guidance is clear that while anyone can be a victim of abuse, schools should recognise that some groups, including LGBTQ+ pupils, are potentially more at risk.
Let's go to Michael Fabricant. Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for her answer. But she'll know that the Ofsted report identified that there's a huge discrepancy between the knowledge of teachers of incidents that are harmful to, young LGBT children and the actual experience of it. So what steps can the department take to train teachers to recognise how harmful sexual behaviour actually affects LGBT young people?
Thank you. The government is committed to working with school leaders, governors and teachers to improve how they can better recognise the effects of sexual harassment and abuse and better support victims. And we expect the issues raised by LGBTQ+ pupils to be addressed as part of this really important work.
And there was.
Question 21, Mr. Speaker.
It's vital that pupils are taught about climate change, which is why related topics are included throughout the geography and science curriculums from 5 to 14 and 5 to 16 respectively. This is mandatory in state-maintained schools. Academies must offer a broad and balanced curriculum exemplified by the national curriculum as well.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. I hope the Secretary of State will join me in welcoming the new member for Chesham and Amersham to this chamber today. I'm sure the Secretary of State will agree with me that it's critical for children and young people not just to learn about the scientific causes and consequences of climate change, but also to equip them for the future in terms of practical action and also the impact on jobs and future careers. With less than 50% of GCSE pupils taking geography, what consideration has he given to creating a standalone subject that properly prepares and empowers our young people to engage with climate change?
Of course, I'd very much like to join her and I'm sure all members in welcoming a new member to this House. It's just a shame that the few Liberal Democrat MPs that are left couldn't be bothered to stay for education questions, and maybe goes to show the priority that the Liberals put on education compared to members on this side of our House and Labour Party members as well. But it's nice that there is a lone voice on behalf of Liberal England. Mr. Speaker, of course, climate change is incredibly important to be taught, and this is why it's so vital that actually it is a key part of the geography curriculum, but it's also an incredibly important part of the science curriculum. And as we all know, that science is absolutely so critical in terms of the understanding of climate change. And I think all of us in this House are deeply indebted, Mr. Speaker, to the former member for Finchley and her amazing work in highlighting global climate change in the 1980s when she was Prime Minister. And the fact that she wasn't just speaking to the United Kingdom, but she was speaking to the globe. And I'm sure there's many members, not just on this side, but also opposite, that recognise the amazing work she did of ensuring that we actually understand it, but take action on it.
Substantive question to Minister Ford.
Mr. Speaker, the Government's Education Recovery Plan includes £17 million for the Nuffield Early Language Intervention. It's an excellent evidence-based programme which targets reception-age children who need extra support with their language development. It's proven to help children make around 3 months of additional progress. 40% of primary schools in England have signed up so far, helping 60,000 children in this academic year.
Let's go to Geraint Davies. Geraint.
Mr. Speaker, before the pandemic, 50% of children from disadvantaged backgrounds suffered a speech delay at school entry. And the Royal College of Speech and Language have now found that since the pandemic, children of all ages from disadvantaged backgrounds have particularly suffered from a speech and language support being withdrawn. So will the Minister now ensure that extra resources are provided for children of all ages from disadvantaged areas for both digital support and in-person support so that their life chances are empowered, not impaired, and those in greatest need of greater support? And will she meet with me in the Royal College to discuss this?
Mr. Speaker, in England, schools can use their recovery funding to purchase additional therapies such as speech and language therapies, and I've seen examples of where that's already happened. Of course, the funding that we've given for recovery, there's been Barnett consequentials of money going into Wales, and I really would encourage the Welsh Government to look at this Nuffield Early Language Initiative. 250,000 children nearly have been screened already for it, and it's making real benefits in England. So please take a look at it across the border, because that's a brilliant way to help children.
Substantive question to Minister Dunn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Trade and Cooperation Agreement is based on cooperation between sovereign equals, centred on free trade and inspired by our shared history and values. The Department discussed the agreement with sector representatives and devolved administrations, and we will continue to do so through bodies such as the Education Sector Advisory Group.
Let's go to Alison Thewlis. Alison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thousands of EU academics have already left the UK for the EU, driven away by the UK government's hostile environment, the government's reckless cuts to funding and in-progress projects, and Brexit uncertainty, with up to 70% more per year leaving for work or study in the EU than any time before the Brexit referendum. So can I ask, how will the Minister's government prevent an even greater brain drain to the EU from UK universities?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member touched on a number of things, including workforce and talent within the UK in our universities. Through the introduction of the new skilled worker and global talent routes, the UK is actually giving top priority to those with the highest skills and the greatest talents, including researchers, scientists and academics, to join our world-leading higher education sector. And the global talent route ensures that highly skilled individuals, including scientists and researchers, can come to the UK and make an important contribution.
Substantive question to Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Government is investing £14.9 billion on research and development in 21 to 22, the highest level for 4 decades. The Department for Business provides funding for academic researchers through UK Research and Innovation and the National Academies, and published detailed allocations in May. I will continue to work closely with the Minister for Science, Research and Innovation.
Let's go to Dr. Philippa Whitford. Philippa.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The UKRI's Global Challenges Research Fund was set up to promote international collaboration on global issues, including climate change and health. But due to the reduction in overseas aid, the funding promised in 2019 has now been cut in half, causing projects to be cancelled and researchers in low-income countries to be made redundant. In many cases, the last 2 years of research will be wasted. So how will the Minister get academics to commit time and energy in the future when they can't trust this government to honour its commitments?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The changes to the level of ODA QR funding made available to universities has been applied equally across the 4 nations of the Union, as the Honourable Member will know. And the Government's research ODA spend includes GCRF, which has been allocated in line with the thematic rather than geographic priorities of the strategic framework for UK ODA. And as outlined by the Right Honourable Foreign Secretary, whilst prioritising high value for money projects and existing legal commitments. I would be delighted to meet the Honourable Member along with the Minister for Science, Innovation and Research to discuss this matter further.
Thank you.
Alongside the £8 billion high needs budget, we fund the Autism Education Trust, which develops autism awareness training for education staff. And over the past decade, over 300,000 staff have been trained. And we've also worked with the Department for Health and Social Care to include children in the autism strategy, which will be published shortly.
Mr. Speaker, the Mackenzie Thorpe Centre is a school in South Bank which provides autistic and neurodiverse young people from across Redcar and Cleveland with the support they need in their education. It's a great example of how local authorities, working in partnership with specialist charities like the North East Autism Society, can provide this type of enhanced support closer to home. Will the Minister come to Redcar and Cleveland and meet with me and the North East Autism Society to see how they can expand their current support and replicate it elsewhere?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is a great champion for Redcar, and I'd certainly be very happy to visit schools in his constituency with him. But I just want to take a moment to thank staff and students in schools and special schools all across the country, and to say this to children. We know it has been such a difficult time, but children, please do hold your heads up high. You've done so much. Be proud of all you have achieved during this pandemic.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with your permission, I shall answer questions 26 and 27 together. Apprenticeships are a great way for employers to develop the skills that they need to build back better, especially as we recover from the pandemic. We have increased the incentive payment to £3,000 for employers hiring a new apprentice, and as of the 4th of May, 52,790 incentive payments had been claimed. We are also making apprenticeships more flexible, encouraging front-loaded and accelerated training, and introducing new flexi-job apprenticeships. We're also making it easier for levy payers to transfer funds to support new apprenticeships within SMEs and within their local areas.
Sherilyn McCormick. Sherilyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for her answer. Our world-class maritime businesses in Falmouth inform me that there is a shortage of qualified maritime and marine engineers. Will my right honourable friend work with me to see how we can best try to accelerate the hiring and training of such apprentices in this important sector so that the marine industry, such as the one here in Falmouth and across the UK, can thrive and prosper in the future?
Minister.
I'd be delighted to work with my honourable friend on such an important industry for her area. I'm also delighted to say that there are over 480 apprenticeship standards approved for delivery that can provide strong support to the marine industry. These include a Level 2 apprenticeship in maritime mechanical and electrical engineering, a Level 4 apprenticeship as a maritime operations officer, and a Level 6 degree apprenticeship as a maritime surveyor, all of which have been supported by expert trailblazers, including the Royal Navy and P&O Ferries and other. And it's my hope that we will be able to use these standards and work together to build on the more than 7,000 apprenticeship starts in Truro and Falmouth since May 2010.
Jack Bright.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the Minister for visiting Stoke-on-Trent College last week with my neighbouring Stoke-on-Trent MPs. Only 22.5% of people in Stoke-on-Trent have a qualification of MVQ4 or above. So would my honourable friend agree that increasing the uptake of apprenticeships in Stoke-on-Trent is a key aspect of improving skill levels, supporting local industries and ensuring more people can access the better paid employment opportunities we want to see?
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend, and that's why I was really delighted to join him and our colleagues, our other Stoke MPs, to visit the Stoke-on-Trent College. And it was great that we were able to meet students who were on a wide variety of pathways and see the fantastic facilities that our investment has enabled at this brilliant college. There have been nearly 30,000 apprenticeship starts in the Stoke-on-Trent area since May 2010, and I encourage learners and employers to take advantage of the support, including the incentive payment that we have of £3,000. Plus, I'm sure he will welcome the establishment of a new Home Office centre that will create more than 500 new roles over 5 years, with an apprenticeship first policy for hiring at the entry grades. But I agree they are absolutely vital to the development and economic recovery in Stoke-on-Trent and beyond.
Minister Toby Perkins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm afraid the Minister just sounds like she's in denial. Between August and January, under 19 apprenticeship starts are 41% lower than they were in 2018-19. Now, we keep telling the government that their apprenticeship incentives are inadequate, and there's been widespread support for Labour's apprenticeship wage subsidy proposal. Now, the Conservative chair of the Education Select Committee has joined those calling for the government to subsidise the wages for young apprentices and help tackle this crisis of opportunity. Why won't the Minister work with us and members right across the House to introduce Labour's apprenticeship wage subsidy proposal?
Minister.
I can assure the honourable gentleman that I'm not in denial, and perhaps he's forgetting the Kickstart scheme, which also does subsidise wages for 6 months for young people, and is a scheme that is live and is going on for the rest of this year. In addition, it may have escaped his notice, perhaps, that many of the sectors have been in lockdown until relatively recently. And if you look at the apprenticeship starts, we are noticing that there is an acceleration in those using the incentive payments to get back to work. Of course, the £3,000 that has been provided can be used in any way that the employer thinks wants to use it, including subsidising wages. So there is a lot of support, and I expect that the numbers will continue to increase.
We now have to come to Topicals, Tom Hunt.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
So stay.
I'd like to start by thanking everyone in the education sector for their dedication throughout the pandemic. Last week I had the pleasure of watching the Skills and Post-16 Education Bill second reading in the other place. This bill will legislate the landmark reforms first set out in the Skills for Jobs White Paper to help transform post-16 education and training, boost skills and get more people into work, helping us to build back better as we come out of this pandemic.
On Friday, I found out about the Diana Award anti-bullying strategy when I visited Gusford Primary School, and I had the pleasure of meeting Harrison, a Year 5 pupil, and Katie, a Year 4 pupil. They are the two anti-bullying ambassadors for Gusford Primary. Single-handedly, the two of them have passionately seemed to be on their way to stamping out bullying in the whole school. They've actually required very little assistance from the teachers. The Diana Award, I understand, are currently awaiting funding, put an application into the Department for Education. Will my right honourable friend confirm here today his commitment to supporting all the work that they are doing to tackle prevention of bullying?
Well, it sounds like amazing work that's going on at Gusford Primary School, and this has been underpinned by £3.5 million worth of funding that has been available to charities and organisations such as the Diana Award, and currently there are a number of organisations that are bidding. I'm afraid I'm not in a position to confirm as to which organisations have been successful, but I understand that the Diana Award is one of those organisations that has been bidding for the next tranche of funding.
Shadow Minister Tulip Siddiq.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the Early Years Alliance revealed secret government documents that expose that ministers have been knowingly underfunding childcare minders and nurseries for years now, knowing full well this would mean increased childcare costs for parents and lower quality early education. Bearing in mind that in this year alone, there's been a net loss of 2,500 childcare facilities in England, will the Minister apologise for covering this up, and will she explain to the House how she plans to rectify the very serious problem of underfunding in early education?
I do wish sometimes that my opposite number would stop scaremongering. We have put an unprecedented investment in childcare over the past decade, over £3.5 billion in each of the last 3 years. There are always a number of reasons why providers come and go from the register, including mergers and acquisitions. The key thing is whether or not there are sufficient places for children. And we monitor the market very closely, and we are continuing to see that there isn't a significant number of parents unable to secure a childcare place this term or since earlier sectors reopened in June.
Mr Speaker, could the Minister update the House on progress being made to change A-levels so as to enable students to apply with known grades rather than predicted grades in the future?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and the consultation closed in mid-May, the 13th of May, and we're looking at the response from that consultation very closely. We really want to bring PQA forward as rapidly as possible. We would like to do that without legislation and in cooperation with the sector, but if we aren't able to have that cooperation, we will drive this forward. All the evidence from the Sutton Trust and so many others is clear that PQA goes to help children from the most disadvantaged families more than any other. That's why we'll make it happen.
Let's go to Margaret Farrier. Margaret.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Given that the National Fire Chiefs Council, Zurich Municipal and many other stakeholders across the UK have repeatedly called for ministers to bring England in line with Scotland and Wales, where sprinklers are compulsory, will the Secretary of State explain under what rationale the Department for Education has chosen to pursue a programme of installing sprinklers only in new schools over 11 metres tall?
We always look at the latest evidence and take the very best guidance. We're very proud of our building programme in schools in terms of new builds and refurbishments, but we always look very close. As the Honourable Lady will be aware, there's some debate as to whether deluge systems or mist systems are best, but we are always guided by the best advice and best evidence in terms of our school building programme.
Let's go to Bob Blackman. Bob.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Our programme of promoting academies and enabling schools and colleges to become academies has been outstandingly successful and very popular. However, there is one section which has not been enabled to convert, and that is the sixth form Catholic colleges. Will my right honourable friend enable an amendment to come to the post-16 education bill to provide an opportunity for Catholic sixth form colleges to academise with the legal protections they need?
I'm aware of how important this is, and we look at all legislative opportunities to see as to how this can best be done, and we're very committed at the earliest opportunity to make it happen. We do want to see Catholic sixth forms be in a position to be able to academise, because we've seen the benefits that can bring to so many schools, and happily work with my honourable friend and others to ensure it happens at the earliest moment.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Instead of disruptions to a third academic year, will the Secretary of State make sure that universities are able to determine their own return of students back in September this coming year? To University of York and York St John have got advanced plans in place, and they don't want to see further delay, including a staggered start. And can that also include international students to be able to quarantine at their local university?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. By the autumn term, we have every expectation that we will be able to move forward beyond Step 4, meaning that there will be no further restrictions on the provision of in-person teaching and learning. During the pandemic, many providers have developed digital offering, and as autonomous institutions might choose to retain elements of that approach, as well as undertake risk assessments. But our expectation is very clear. Universities should maintain the quality, quantity and accessibility of provision. And in terms of international students, we have been one of the world's leaders in our visa concessions and flexibilities, and I shall continue to work closely with the Home Office and the Department of Health to ensure that the best interests of students are always maintained, as well as public health.
Let's go to Henry Smith. Henry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I refer the House to my declarations of interests. Can the Secretary of State say what particular support for pupils with dyslexia is being made available to help catch up from the disruptions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic?
The £3 billion educational recovery interventions are largely targeted towards those children who need help most. And the catch-up and recovery premiums can be used flexibly by schools to support pupils with special educational needs, including those with dyslexia.
Let's go to Mohammed Yazin. Mohammed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Develop Bedford is part of a small, not-for-profit organisation providing personalised teaching and training to local learners. Many of their 31 students, Mr. Speaker, have special educational needs and disabilities and cannot attend mainstream college. So can the Secretary of State explain me why this incredible centre's ESFA funding will be stopped in July and how they will support its devastated students and families?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have, of course, increased our high needs budget by nearly a quarter over the past 2 years and put additional funding through the recovery and catch-up programmes towards special needs, supporting those children who need to be in special schools and not mainstream schools. But I would be very happy to meet with the honourable member and look at the specific case that he is raising.
Right, Philip Davies.
Cash Singh came to the United Kingdom aged 7, unable to speak English, and became a very popular police inspector in Bradford. On his retirement, he set up OBON, One Britain, One Nation, which aims to bring communities, particularly school children, together under a common cause of being proud of being British and a pride in British values. OBON Day is on Friday. Will the Secretary of State thank Cash Singh for all he does in his work in this regard, and will he encourage all the schools to take part in OBON Day on Friday?
I'd very much like to thank Cash Singh for the work he's done in terms of actually highlighting this and this amazing project. And it's so incredibly important that schools do take part in it. We've already asked schools to be able to participate in this, and we're very happy from the dispatch box to reiterate that endorsement of this project and encourage them to play their part in it.
Let's go to Dame Diana Johnson. Diana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How confident is the Secretary of State that children and young people in the care of local authorities are protected from grooming gangs, and what discussions has he had with the Home Secretary about what more needs to be done to protect this group of young people?
I have regular discussions with the Home Secretary and across government on this issue. It's absolutely vital that everything is done to address this. I know this is something that is felt on both sides of this House, and we will continue to put all resources and all effort that is required in order to tackle this vital and important issue.
Butler.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In the digital age, it is more important than ever that school and college courses are reflective of the skills needed by employers in the future. Could my honourable friend outline what steps she and her department are taking to bring forward new technical qualifications that will ensure students from Aylesbury, especially at the UTC or at the Further Education College, are well equipped to meet the demands of the modern economy?
Well, thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and he's absolutely right. Technical skills and education are vital to our modern economy, and never have we seen that more so than during this pandemic. The Conservative government is encouraging more students into STEM education at all stages, from primary to higher education. We are proud to have rolled out multiple programmes to increase the support and uptake of STEM subjects, including through the National Centre for Computing Education. We're also investing £138 million to fund the rollout of skills boot camps across the country and free courses for jobs through which adults can study for these qualifications as well, such as a diploma in networking and cybersecurity or a certificate in systems infrastructure. I'm also delighted that from September 2021, Buckinghamshire College Group will be offering our new employer design digital T-level.
Let's go to Rosie Cooper. Rosie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Secretary of State share my concern about the impact of the last year on teacher retention? And what plans does he have to mitigate this, incentivising new entrants to the teaching profession, perhaps considering more grant funding for those planning to enter the teaching profession? Will he make some positive steps?
Well, we continue to support recruitment into the teaching profession with an extensive bursary scheme in order to be able to incentivise people to take up the teaching profession, and especially those areas of greatest shortage. We are also continue to remain committed to our £30,000 starting salary for teachers, which we recognise is an incredibly compelling offer for many people to enter the teaching profession. But, Mr Speaker, you'll be pleased to hear that actually last year we saw a record number of people choosing to enter the teaching profession, and we expect to have a similar sort of result this year as well.
Let's go to Mark Menzies. Mark.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank my right honourable friend for the recently announced multi-million-pound rebuild of Lytham St Anne's High. But looking to the present, what steps is the department taking to help school leavers this summer as they transition into work or higher education following severe disruption to the final 2 academic years?
Well, I'd like to pay tribute to my honourable friend who campaigned so hard in order to be able to get the funding for Lytham St Anne High School in order to be able to deliver for his constituents in terms of that rebuilding there. We continue to work with all schools throughout the remainder of this academic year to ensure that there's as much support for students, whether this is the recovery premium that schools have been in receipt of, whether this is in reference to the money that has been made available for summer schools so that schools are able to put on additional activities. And of course, in the further education sector, they've also been supported in order for them to be able to support their pupils to get on to the very next best opportunities.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Association of Colleges has accused the UK Government of creating an education versus work divide by requiring universal credit claimants to prioritise looking for work over training. How exactly does the Government expect disadvantaged universal credit claimants to train and improve their skills if their financial support is linked to prioritising work over training opportunities?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and perhaps he would like me to update him that actually we have been working with the DWP to extend the time that those who are claiming universal credit can now undertake college courses. That's been extended to 12 weeks, and for the boot camps that we're rolling out all across the country, anybody that wants to go on a boot camp can complete it right up to the end, up to 16 weeks in total.
Speaker, the Department of Health and Social Care is closing the asymptomatic testing and lateral flow testing facilities at the University of Hull on July the 31st. This is despite the fact that the university remains open during the summer for staff, postgraduates, international students and students who cannot return home, and despite the fact that not all students have been double vaccinated and the number of cases are rising. Will the Universities Minister urgently intervene and speak to her colleagues at DHSC to keep testing open at the University of Hull?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As the honourable member will know that we have worked very close with the Department of Health and Social Care throughout this pandemic and continue to be as accessible as possible to students in terms of the testing offer. In addition, students can also utilise the universal testing offer, and I shall continue to work closely with the Department of Health in regards to the summer provision and also the autumn provision, and I'm happy to meet with the honourable member to discuss this further.
Final question, Shadow Minister Peter Kyle.
I'm extremely grateful, Mr Speaker. Thank you. Ministers failed to secure over 90% of the funding called for by Kevin Collins for the Catch-up Fund. We've just discovered that 100,000 vulnerable students, disadvantaged students, are going to miss out on pupil premium because ministers have failed to secure the funding. Over the weekend, the Chancellor gave the reason why when he was asked. He said because he can't fund every cause that comes knocking at his door. Don't students in this country deserve a set of ministers that have the skill and determination to get through the front door of the Treasury and come out with the investment that our schools and students and teachers need?
We have announced a £1.4 billion, that's the third education recovery package,
that we've announced in the last 12 months. It comes on top of £1 billion announced in June 2020, the £700 million announced in February last year, and that £1.4 billion will provide an extra £1 billion for tutoring, providing up to 100 million hours of tutoring, 6 million 15-hour courses for 5 to 16-year-olds and 2 million 15-hour courses for 16 to 19-year-olds. This is a huge package, and now we are reviewing the time aspect of the recommendations made by Sir Kevin, and that will report into the spending review later this year.
Point for it. Is it relevant to the question?
It is, Mr. Speaker, yes.
Kate Green.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure inadvertently a few moments ago the Secretary of State, in answer to me, said that he and the Prime Minister had a plan to roll out tutoring to 6 million children across the country. This is an error that was also made last week by the Prime Minister in Prime Minister's questions, but as I'm sure the Secretary of State will wish to make clear to the House, the correct figure is 6 million tutoring sessions. That is slightly different, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear. The Secretary want to come back? Secretary of State.
To be absolutely clear, Mr. Speaker, we aim to roll out tutoring for 6 million pupils across the country.
Right, that's on the record. I am now suspending the House for 3 minutes.